Hey guys, so I'm here in the middle of Lyme Park, Peak District in England. Absolutely beautiful place. It's a bit cold today, a bit muddy, but you know what? I absolutely love it. This is my natural environment. So, what can a guy that's sat against a wall covered in mud teach to you about leadership? Well, interestingly enough, that's what I do. I'm a leader. I'm an inspirational leader at that, and I've led people for my whole adult life. This started off way before I went to Sandhurst, but you know what? That's where I really learned my craft. Sandhurst, in case you're not aware, is a year-long course, and it prepares every person who wants to become a British Army officer for their first appointment. In my case, I joined the Cheshire Regiment, which is a local county infantry regiment in the British Army. So I was going to be at the cutting edge of the British Army, and from day one in that post, I led men, and I continued to lead men until I left the army last year. So Sandhurst prepares you for every eventuality of leadership. You learn about the theory, you learn about the practical application, and you learn your field craft as a soldier as well. So that by the time that you turn up and you take over your first platoon of 30 men, you are ready for it. Now, it's a pretty daunting experience, and you prepare yourself mentally for that first day when you meet your platoon and you give them that first speech saying, hey, this is me, this is what we're going to do together. And you want to try and capture them from that very first moment. And that's completely the same when any team turns up and a new leader takes over. Now, these guys in the army, they've seen it all before. The new officer comes in every 2 years, thinks he's the best officer since sliced bread, and like I say, they've seen it all before, so it's really difficult for you to become someone that they remember. Now, I know that I did well with my guys that I led throughout my time in the army, because you can ask any one of them, and they're not going to lie. They'll tell you exactly how they felt about every leader that they had, and we had a really good bond together. And this is where you learn your own leadership style. So some people will use their rank, some people will use their authority, and some people will get a little bit too close to the men. It's very difficult because you're living in difficult, dangerous and austere conditions with these people for months at a time, just you and them. So it's very difficult not to create a bond which is potentially too close, but that's the balance that you've got to find. And it's the same with anything, it's all about finding balance. I did that very well. There were a couple of occasions where I maybe got a little bit too close to the men, but I very quickly learned how to sort of step back and reassert my authority, but not in a way where I acted like a bit of an arsehole. They respected me and they wanted to do what I needed them to do because they wanted to do it for me rather than because I was ordering them to with fear of punishment or whatever. And that was just my fortune as an inspirational leader to be able to do that. But what I want to do is just talk to you a little bit more about leadership so we can really understand what lessons you guys can learn from that. So learning to lead in the British Army, especially during the last 10 years when we've been in the war on terror, has been an excellent baptism of fire in terms of learning leadership and the techniques and the skills required to take forward into future business or any other arena where leadership's required, which is pretty much everywhere. So you've got to understand the theory behind leadership, but don't get too caught up on it because there's 1,000 books there about it, but ultimately you've got to do it and it's down to you, and you're not going to have a book to refer to when you're in the middle of leading your team. And ultimately you've got to be able to make a first impression and continue to prove yourself every day after that, because one slip up and you'll never forget it. And usually in most organisations people talk, so if you screw up once, people are going to hear about it for as long as you're still in that organisation and even beyond, really. So ultimately, you've got to prove yourself every day. You've got to build that trust and you've got to build rapport. I learned from the theoretical lessons that I'm an inspirational leader. And basically what that means is that you lead from the front. If you're asking your men to dig a trench, then you get in that trench and start digging it as well. If you're asking men to go into a firefight, you're leading the way. And if you're asking men to be a certain level of fitness or a certain level of academic standing, you're doing that as well. You don't tell people to do what you can't or aren't prepared to do yourself. And that's the key thing about being an inspirational leader. And you can ask any of the guys that I led throughout my time in the army, and obviously without me telling them to say so, they'll say that to you, and I'm very confident that that's the case. My leadership was put to the test every day in the British Army, and like I say, it's a real baptism of fire. You either sink or swim, and it's something that you learn along the way. But some people are natural leaders, and I see myself as one. So that was very fortunate, obviously made it a lot easier for me. And you could see other people that weren't particularly natural leaders, and they would end up struggling quite significantly trying to find that balance between being too authoritarian, being too friendly with the men, and really just trying to strike that balance whilst at the same time doing a very difficult job. And don't get me wrong, even the bad leaders in the army still had a very difficult job to do. And then moving forward into the sort of commercial business sector, everything that I learned in the army, massive application, and it's very easy to switch it over to that. So you're leading teams, you've got to bond people together, and you've got to understand whether it's a carrot and a stick for some people, a bit of a hug for other people, or shouting at other people to get them to do what needed to be done. So we'll talk about that a little bit more throughout this series, but just start to think about what your leadership style is. Cheers. So to help you along your way with understanding leadership styles, how familiar are you with the different styles of leadership? You can Google them very easily, have a look at them, but as I say, don't hold on to the theory, because ultimately as leaders we need to be practitioners, and some people learn, some people remember things differently. Ultimately it's down to you how you perform day in, day out. If you're a good leader, don't take it for granted, you've still got to work at it. Same as David Beckham. Yes, he's a naturally gifted footballer, but he trained every single day to be able to do those free kicks that he was able to pull off. Exactly the same with being a leader. Best bit of advice I could give you is, if you want to learn about leadership, read the autobiographies or biographies of great leaders. The military has had some amazing leaders throughout history, so read some biographies of military leaders. Also read the biographies of leaders from business, sports. Alex Ferguson, Manchester United's former manager, has just released a book on leadership, which is really good. So don't just think that you have to stick to whatever your area of expertise is. So if you're in business, try and read leadership lessons from the military or sports. If you're in sports, again, switch it over. Get a breadth of understanding of the practical application of leadership. See what things worked for other great leaders and try and apply them. But ultimately, this is why I'd probably steer away from reading too heavily into the theory. You have to find your own style, and that's not going to come from replicating anybody else. You've just got to find what works for you and what's comfortable, and be authentic, because ultimately if you put up a pretense of being a certain type of leader but that's not actually you, it'll fall apart and people will see through it and you'll make mistakes. So accept first of all whether or not you're a leader. If you're a leader, then work on it every day to make yourself a better one. And if you're not a leader but you're still in a position of authority, then try and delegate some of the tasks that are required to other people that are going to do it better than you, and that's how you are actually going to build a team. Give it a try.